still waiting to see if there is something from Buckingham Palace. There is nothing to report on that front at the moment, but of course that could change at a moment's notice. The situation, as we understand it at the moment, continues to be that there is widespread and deep concern about the health of the Queen. Following the statement by her doctors this morning, clearly there has been some episode which has occurred overnight, which has given rise to that concern, and which prompted the doctors and Buckingham Palace to put out a statement indicating that there is concern about the Queen's health. Members of her family have broken off and travelled to Scotland. Prince Charles and the Duchess of Cornwall were already there. They have travelled across to Balmoral Castle, where they have also been joined by the Princess Royal. And other members of the royal family, 4 members of the royal family, have travelled up from London on an RAF flight. The Duke of Cambridge, the Duke of York, and the Earl and Countess of Wessex.
There is expectation now, clearly, Nick, if we look at the images here of Buckingham Palace, and the area in front of it dominated, of course, by the Queen Victoria Memorial at this end of the Mall. But crowds now starting to gather at those gates, where announcements in the past have been made, of course, about all kinds of things and events in the royal family's life. But I think today reflects really a crowd which is starting to gather, just basically expressing concern and just hoping for the best, is how I'd put it.
Yes, I think that is the fairest way we can put it, Hugh. Millions of people here and elsewhere will be hoping for the best, but they will be, I think, now fearing the worst and perhaps preparing for the worst. But we must continue to hope that whatever news we get from Buckingham Palace will indicate that things are okay at Balmoral. But I think that is as much really as we can say at this stage. There is great concern. That concern has been expressed by politicians at the most senior level, and they will know what the true situation is. They will have been briefed, and they will have briefed each other on Privy Council terms. So I think that that is the fairest indication that we can give to our viewers, both here and around the world at this stage, that there is, as we keep saying, there is profound concern, there is deep concern. But at this stage, we do not have any further news from Buckingham Palace.
Nick, we're just looking at these images here because, of course, they are really reflecting people's deep alarm and deep concern about the fact that the Queen is extremely unwell, and, of course, that we are expecting the news from Balmoral that she's having treatment, or that indeed they are unable to help Her Majesty anymore. A few moments ago, Buckingham Palace announced the death of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. The Palace has just issued this statement. It says the Queen died peacefully at Balmoral this afternoon. The King and the Queen Consort will remain at Balmoral this evening and will return to London tomorrow. Within the past few minutes, Buckingham Palace has announced the death of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. To recap on the statement, the Queen died peacefully at Balmoral this afternoon. The King, that is Charles, and the Queen Consort will remain at Balmoral this evening and will return to London tomorrow. Her Majesty was 96 years old. She became Queen on the 6th of February 1952, on the death of her father, King George VI. She heard the news while staying at a game lodge in Kenya at the age of 25. And her coronation in Westminster Abbey was watched by more than 20 million people. She was married to Prince Philip for 73 years until his death in April of 2021. And Charles, their first child, was born in 1948. He now becomes the new king. In 2015, Her Majesty passed Queen Victoria to become the longest reigning monarch in British history. And in February 2022, we saw the 70th anniversary of her becoming queen. And she made more than 250 visits to Commonwealth countries and was head of state in Australia and Canada and New Zealand. Winston Churchill was Britain's Prime Minister when she came to the throne, and Liz Truss was her 15th Prime Minister. The BBC is interrupting its normal programmes to bring you an important announcement. This is BBC News from London. Buckingham Palace has announced the death of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. In a statement, the palace said the Queen died peacefully at Balmoral this afternoon. The King and the Queen Consort will remain at Balmoral this evening and will return to London tomorrow. BBC Television is broadcasting this special programme reporting the death of Her Majesty the Queen. This is BBC News from London. Buckingham Palace has announced the death of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. In a statement, the palace said the Queen died peacefully at Balmoral this afternoon. The King and the Queen Consort will remain at Balmoral this evening and will return to London tomorrow. The death of Her Majesty brings to an end the longest reign in British history, spanning 8 decades of immense change. Throughout that time, Her Majesty was the one constant presence in public life, a head of state who personified stability and reassurance. Her life had been dedicated to the service of the people, and her reign was characterised by a steadfast sense of duty. Elizabeth was just 25 when she came to the throne in 1952 on the sudden death of her father, King George VI, as Britain was still recovering from the Second World War. She was sustained by her 73-year marriage to the late Prince Philip, her strength and stay, as she once described him, who was at her side for 3 major Jubilee celebrations. Elizabeth II was the most widely travelled head of state in history, the Queen of 15 nations, head of the Commonwealth of 54 countries and territories. Her Majesty's death brings the second Elizabethan age to a close and a long and momentous chapter in British life, a reign marked above all else by a sense of service to others, a reign unlike any other in the long history of Britain and the Commonwealth. Our royal correspondent, Nicholas Witchell, is with me. as we report the news of the death of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. And one thinks immediately, Nick, first of all, of the loss for the royal family.
One does. This, for the nation, for them, this is an absolutely massive moment. The moment that so many people have dreaded for so long has come. It's a moment of great solemnity and national sadness. It's hard, really, fully to take it in. It's no great surprise, given her age and her declining health. But nonetheless, it is a very considerable shock to feel that she has died. Millions of people, I think, as they learn this news, will feel a sense of personal loss. And I think many people will find it rather disorientating. Let's just understand this moment. It isn't just the death of the longest lived, longest reigning monarch in British history, a monarch who has been there in the background to our lives for most of us, for all of our lives. It is the end of what I think history will judge to have been one of the most remarkable reigns in the 1,000+ years of the British monarchy, a reign which will be remembered and talked about in years to come. Now, whether you are a monarchist or not, and we know, as we've said this afternoon, that not everyone is, she was a monarch who earned the widest possible respect here in the United Kingdom and throughout the world. It's the end of the reign of Elizabeth II, a monarch who always put duty first, who brought dignity and decency to the highest office in the land, who embodied the best of qualities, who's been a focus for national unity and identity, and who has been the still, calm centre of stability and reassurance to this nation and the other nations of which she has been head of state for more than 70 years, while so much around her has changed. She has been a distillation of our national identity. She has been constant in an ever-shifting world, constant, steadfast, dependable, dutiful. These are all rather old-fashioned words, old-fashioned concepts even, but I think they sum up what she was, the role of monarch. We recall the pledge she made on her 21st birthday. I declare before you all that my whole life, whether it be long or short, shall be devoted to your service. Well, she truly remained true to that pledge. It was a life of finely judged service, true to the principles of constitutional monarchy, driven by duty, sustained by faith. And we recall also the message that she issued when she reached her 70th birthday in February of this year. You remember the message that was issued? She wrote, "I remain eternally grateful for and humbled by the loyalty and affection that you continue to give me." She said, "I look forward to continuing to serve you with all of my heart." And she signed that message, "Your servant, Elizabeth R." Well, that servant has gone. The end of the reign of Elizabeth II, Elizabeth the Great, as many people will regard her. That reign has ended. And we have a new king.
Yes.
The crown passes invisibly, but immediately, imperceptibly. Charles is now our king and our head of state. Camilla is now Queen Consort. It remains to be seen what name he will take, but we will refer to him as the king, and he will lead the nation's mourning for his mother. As you say, she came to the throne just a few years after the end of the Second World War. She succeeded to the throne in 1952 after the death of her father. And on the night of her coronation, in a broadcast on the BBC, she said, "Throughout all of my life and with all of my heart, I shall strive to be worthy of your service." And as that message, and as the message she issued on the 70th anniversary of her accession showed, if there is one word that I think is the key to the success of her reign, I would suggest it's not actually duty, the word which is normally associated with her, it's humility. Because for all of the grandness of her position, here is the coronation, the imperial state crown being lowered onto her head by the Archbishop of Canterbury. For all the grandness of her position, it never went to her head. She had, I think, an instinctive understanding that as a hereditary monarch, she had to win the trust of the people of this country and the other countries of which she was queen. And that, I believe, is what she did. She gained it and she kept it. She kept the monarchy strong. Now, of course, there have been a few bumps along the way. It would be extraordinary if there hadn't been. Bumps which have almost without exception been caused by other members of her family. But she pursued her role with that sense of humility and by putting duty first. And she was at heart, people who knew her, it's funny to talk in the past tense now,
yes.
Isn't it? She was a very down-to-earth, a straightforward and unpretentious woman, rather reserved, certainly in her early years. There was none of that sort of vainglorious and overbearing behaviour that we've sometimes perhaps seen with other members of her family. For 70 years, she's been the constant, unchanging presence in the background to our lives, the head of the nation, as she's sometimes been referred to, above politics, but with a shrewd interest in and a grasp of politics and of political figures. So we now look back on, and there will be so many tributes now, as people take this in, as they come to terms with their own emotions. And I'm quite sure there will be many people who are very emotional at this moment, as they learn of this news, the death of the Queen. But this nation and so many other nations will now pay tribute to this long life of service which has now ended.
Symbolised everywhere, Nick. The flags are being lowered, and the rainbow along with the lowered flag at Windsor, the favourite home of the Queen. So many years. Flags lowered already at Buckingham Palace. And so many elements, Nick, of your appreciation and tribute will be echoed by political leaders at Downing Street. We're expecting Liz Truss to say something fairly soon. The Prime Minister will offer her own sympathy to the royal family, and she will, of course, have her own words of appreciation for the long service of Her Majesty. And there'll be other political leaders too wanting to pay tribute to a lifetime of service, a lifetime of humble commitment to duty, as Nick was saying, and of taking the role as seriously as it's possible to take it. Very much in line with the teaching that her father had shared with her all those years ago in Buckingham Palace. King George VI, very proud of his two daughters, and took a long time to offer the experience and learning to his elder daughter Elizabeth. And there you have, at the railings of Buckingham Palace, they are, in line with tradition, posting the formal notice. And that notice will say that Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II has died peacefully today at Balmoral in Scotland. The age of 96, the longest reigning monarch in British history. A lifetime of service to people in the United Kingdom, throughout the Commonwealth, and in many parts of the world. An example of leadership which didn't stray into the realm of politics, and for lots of people the ideal symbol of what a constitutional monarchy should be like. Well, now the world has been told, and the official notice has been posted as the palace staff make their way back into what was the Queen's home. It is now the home of the King and the Queen Consort, because Prince Charles is now King Charles. Remains to be seen whether he will call himself Charles as king, but we are assuming that he will. And this now is the home of the new monarch, the king, and his consort, the Queen consort. Crowds still gathering at Buckingham Palace because the news has travelled very rapidly here and at Windsor and at all the other royal residences. But of course people will be following these events closely on their televisions and their mobile devices and all kinds of different means of spreading the news and social media as people come to terms with what's happened. And as Nick was saying memorably a few moments ago, it's a seismic event. It's the longest reigning monarch in British history who's left us at the age of 96, and it's not a surprise when someone of that age suffers ill health and eventually passes away. But what is left, of course, is the reflection on what was achieved and the kind of life that was led and the sense of duty and the sense of loyalty and, as Nick was saying, the sense of humility, which seems rather bizarre to say for a monarch, but someone who had a sense of service to others. And this was a theme that was repeated so often in the Queen's statements at great milestones in her life, and those 4 great jubilees, where she underlined the notion of service, to be at the service of the people, and to appreciate the fact that people were loyal to her as a monarch, and appreciated the fact that she was of, well, incalculable value in terms of her service to Britain, having come to the throne at such a young age and with very little experience. At the age of 25, when she didn't expect to be in that position at all, her father suddenly dying in his 50s. A terrible blow, and then a huge burden for the young Queen to be bearing. But she did so, and with a strong sense of what the monarchy was meant to be, the sense that her father had shared with her. And as we said earlier, for those considering the nature of the reign, the longest reign in British history, it was in many senses a continuation of the reign of George VI. The crowds at the palace will have seen this formal announcement. The Queen died peacefully at Balmoral this afternoon. The King and Queen Consort will be staying at Balmoral tonight and will be returning to London tomorrow. And that is the formal announcement to the world in the traditional way, the printed statement being fixed to the railings of Buckingham Palace. And that, when we see that, Nick, that is the chapter completed.
And the vehicles there outside Buckingham Palace are stopping. The word will be reaching people. People will be very shocked, I think, by this. I think it is very hard to take it in. But there is, as you say, the news. The Queen died peacefully at Balmoral this afternoon, so presumably she must have died before the members of her family arrived at Balmoral, but they will have known, as they drove in through the gates, they will have known that the Queen, their mother or their grandmother, had died. It doesn't make any reference as to whether the King was at her bedside, but we do know that Charles and Camilla had travelled across to Balmoral Castle, so one presumes that they will have been there at the end. And the Princess Royal as well, one must assume, though they have not said that. And of course there will be many arrangements, but before the arrangements there will be all the tributes. And those will be on a scale that we have really not seen before.
No. They've started, Nick, already, as you can imagine. President Biden, the White House, he and his wife saying our hearts and thoughts go to the Queen's family and the British people, of course, coming from our strongest ally, so you'd expect the statement to be warm and sincere, as it is, but as you say, Nick, it'll be just the start of countless tributes from world leaders, religious leaders, and of course, I think it's right to say this, from millions of people, from ordinary people who will want to be sharing their sense of loss.
Yes, yes, and that sense of loss will be deep and it will be widespread. As we've both been saying, people will feel a personal loss, that a person who they in some way knew or felt they knew has gone, who was always there, who was this reassuring presence, this embodiment of stability and continuity, and who personified the unity of the United Kingdom. It is, as I think you used the word, it is a seismic event in terms of the United Kingdom, and of course it, I think, will rather add to that sense of flux that we have at the moment.
Yes.
Of political change with a new Prime Minister, of economic crisis with all the energy costs, gosh, who's giving a thought to that huge statement that the new Prime Minister made in the House of Commons today about that. There is war in Europe. Well, the monarchy, in one of those hard to put your finger on ways, is a stabilising and unifying force, and that will be the challenge now for Charles as king, and he, I'm sure, will want to act quickly. He will lead the mourning for his mother, for the Queen, but he will, I'm sure, also want to just indicate that he understands what is required as a constitutional monarch. He has already indicated that he does completely understand that it is a different role, that he will have to give up his interventions, but I think that he will reign in a slightly different way. I mean, the fundamentals are the same, but each monarch brings something of their own personality to the role, and I think that Charles will try to continue his interest in some of those issues without in any way allowing politics or a political scope to come into it.
I'm told, Nick, that we are expecting a statement from the new king fairly shortly. So when we have that, we'll bring it right away. And as we look at these rather nice images of Her Majesty, of course, engaged in one of the endless official engagements that she's done over the years. It's worth bringing in as well some remarks from the Dutch royal family, because the British royal family and the Dutch royal family have enjoyed close relations over the years. The Dutch royal family saying, "We remember Queen Elizabeth II with deep respect and with great affection. Steadfast and wise, she dedicated her long life to serving the British people. We feel a strong bond." This is the King of the Netherlands. "We feel a strong bond with the United Kingdom and its royal family, and we share their sorrow at this time. And we're very grateful for our country's close friendship, to which Queen Elizabeth made such an unforgettable contribution." King Willem Alexander and Queen Maxima and Princess Beatrix of the Netherlands offering their tributes. Just worth underlining the scale and the importance and the impact of what we are reporting today. It is a huge milestone in the history of the United Kingdom. The fact that the Queen, who was crowned back in 1953, has died peacefully at Balmoral in Scotland this afternoon. The King, that is King Charles, and the Queen Consort will be staying at Balmoral this evening, and then we will be expecting them to return to London tomorrow. And that's a statement also expected from the new King sometime in the next maybe 20 minutes or so. But these images remind us of those happy days which really do just set the foundations really for a hugely successful and productive reign. Coronation Day back in 1953, Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, just on the right-hand side there, the Duke of Edinburgh, just behind her. But the Queen, the young Queen, became Queen at the age of 25, acknowledging the huge crowd that had gathered on Coronation Day back in 1953. Well, we're looking at the woman who would become the longest reigning monarch in the history of the United Kingdom. And here we are in 2022 reporting on the Queen's death at the age of 96. Buckingham Palace formally making that announcement a short while ago, saying that the Queen, whose health was the matter of a bulletin earlier today, and doctors expressing their concern, Queen died peacefully at Balmoral during the course of this evening. We don't have a precise time, but we do know that several members of the royal family were at Balmoral, and they were no doubt in a meeting with the doctors and the experts when they got there. And indeed the news came fairly soon after their arrival that Her Majesty had indeed passed away at the age of 96. Earlier today, they were saying that she was being kept comfortable in Balmoral. There was no sign of any move to hospital, no sign of any further intervention by doctors in a different kind of facility. All the care was being done at Balmoral itself. And indeed, a few hours later came the very sad news, which will affect many millions of people, that Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II has died at the age of 96, having lost her husband, Prince Philip, back in 2021. And on the Queen's death, we now have a new king. Prince Charles will become King Charles, possibly, with a consort who will be the Queen consort, known as Camilla, the Duchess of Cornwall. Buckingham Palace has announced the death of Queen Elizabeth II, the longest serving monarch in the history of the United Kingdom, and the commanding presence in British public life for more than 8 decades. She died at Balmoral in Aberdeenshire today at the age of 96. The Queen's eldest son, Charles, at the age of 73, has become king. And within the past few minutes, Buckingham Palace released this formal statement. The Queen died peacefully at Balmoral this afternoon. The King and the Queen consort will remain at Balmoral this evening and will return to London tomorrow. We are expecting a statement from the new King fairly shortly. We're also expecting a statement from the new Prime Minister, Liz Truss, who visited the Queen in Balmoral just a couple of days ago, and was able to accept the invitation to form a government in that audience, where the Queen was seen to be smiling broadly and looked very focused on the task at hand, albeit looking rather frail. Well, that was 2 days ago, and yesterday came the news that she was unable to fulfil an appointment with the Privy Council. That's the senior ministers in the new government of Liz Truss. It was to be an online meeting, but nonetheless, the Queen was judged to be too tired and she needed to rest. She wasn't well, and her doctor suggested last evening that that meeting should not be held, and she was resting last night. And by this morning, indeed, late morning, the Queen's doctors were clearly very concerned, and that the Queen's condition had deteriorated fairly rapidly. And then by lunchtime we had the statement that her health was causing particular concern. And then we saw the members of the family arriving at Balmoral. And shortly after that, within the past half hour or so, came the formal statement that Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II has died at the age of 96. We have statements from lots of world leaders. We'll come to them in a second. The President of the Irish Republic, for example, Michael D. Higgins. The Queen visited the Irish Republic back in 2011. She was the first British monarch to visit the Irish Republic. It was a hugely successful meeting. I've got a very warm welcome there. Her Majesty, says President Higgins, served the British people with exceptional dignity. Her personal commitment to her role and extraordinary sense of duty were the hallmarks of her period as Queen, which will hold a unique place in British history. There aren't many who will disagree with that. That's President Michael Higgins of the Republic of Ireland. The Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby, has just issued this statement, which of course will be welcomed by Charles as the new king as well. He says, "May Her late Majesty Queen Elizabeth II rest in peace and rise in glory." Justin Welby, the Archbishop of Canterbury. As she had done before, she reminded us of a deep truth about ourselves, says the Archbishop. "We are a people of hope who care for one another." A very warm tribute and a sincere tribute from the Archbishop himself. I think we can bring a little more from the Archbishop, and it's a very eloquent tribute, as you'd imagine, from Justin Welby. "It's with profound sadness," says the Archbishop, "that I join the nation, the Commonwealth and the world in mourning the death of Her late Majesty the Queen. My prayers are with the King and with the royal family. May God draw near them and comfort them in the days and weeks and months ahead." The Archbishop goes on, "As we grieve together, we know that in losing our beloved Queen, we have lost the person whose steadfast loyalty, service and humility has helped us make sense of who we are through decades of extraordinary change in our world, our nation and society. And as deep as our grief runs, even deeper is our gratitude for Her late Majesty's extraordinary dedication to the United Kingdom, her realms and the Commonwealth. Through times of war and hardship," says the Archbishop, "through seasons of upheaval and change, and through moments of joy and celebration, we have sustained by Her late Majesty's faith in what and who we are called to be." The Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby, with that moving statement. We also have a statement from the King, from Charles, who became king on the death of his mother. And Charles says this: "We mourn profoundly the passing of a cherished sovereign and a much-loved mother. I know her loss will be deeply felt throughout the country, the realms and the Commonwealth, and by countless people around the world." The tribute there by the new king, by Charles, who became king immediately on his mother's death. So the tone, as one would expect, is loving, it's warm, it's respectful, and it just underlines the affection in which the Queen was held. We are expecting the Prime Minister in just a moment, Nick, but that statement was moving, wasn't it?
It was, yes. My beloved mother, a moment of the greatest sadness for me and all the members of my family. Interesting that it's not signed as King Charles. There's no name on it. It has been suggested that he might take another name as king, but I suspect it'll be tomorrow before we learn that. But yes, it's quite hard to sum up the profound nature of this moment, isn't it, really? They have lost their mother or their grandmother. They must grieve privately, but Charles must now begin to assert himself and begin his reign. I'm sure he will travel around the country. He will, I mean, this is challenging. It would be challenging for anybody, and we're about clearly to hear now from the Prime Minister.
We are all devastated by the news that we have just heard from Balmoral. The death of Her Majesty the Queen is a huge shock to the nation and to the world. Queen Elizabeth II was the rock on which modern Britain was built. Our country has grown and flourished under her reign. Britain is the great country it is today because of her. She ascended the throne just after the Second World War. She championed the development of the Commonwealth from a small group of 7 countries to a family of 56 nations, spanning every continent of the world. We are now a modern, thriving, dynamic nation. Through thick and thin, Queen Elizabeth II provided us with the stability and the strength that we needed. She was the very spirit of Great Britain, and that spirit will endure. She has been our longest ever reigning monarch. It's an extraordinary achievement to have presided with such dignity and grace for 70 years. Her life of service stretched beyond most of our living memories. In return, she was loved and admired by the people in the United Kingdom and all around the world. She has been a personal inspiration to me and to many Britons. Her devotion to duty is an example to us all. Earlier this week, at 96, she remained determined to carry out her duties as she appointed me as her 15th Prime Minister. Throughout her life, she's visited more than 100 countries, and she has touched the lives of millions around the world. In the difficult days ahead, we will come together with our friends across the United Kingdom, the Commonwealth and the world to celebrate her extraordinary lifetime of service. It is a day of great loss, but Queen Elizabeth II leaves a great legacy. Today the crown passes, as it has done for more than 1,000 years, to our new monarch, our new head of state, His Majesty King Charles III. With the King's family, we mourn the loss of his mother, and as we mourn, we must come together as a people to support him, to help him bear the awesome responsibility that he now carries for us all. We offer him our loyalty and devotion, just as his mother devoted so much to so many for so long. And with the passing of the second Elizabethan age, we usher in a new era in the magnificent history of our great country, exactly as Her Majesty would have wished, by saying the words, "God save the King."
The Prime Minister, Liz Truss, who was installed at Downing Street just a couple of days ago, having met the Queen in that audience, really presenting her own tribute with some personal elements in that, but also revealing something which we were hoping to hear, either from the Prime Minister or from the Palace, which is that Charles will be known as King Charles III, Nick, and that is at least confirming the title that he has adopted.
Yep, that answers that question. And of course, for him, for Charles, there will be conflicting emotions at this moment. Yeah. There is the great sadness that he refers to in his statement of the loss of his mother. But at the same time, this is the moment when he finally achieves his destiny. He is the oldest and longest serving heir apparent in British history. He will be the oldest person to become king in British history. Previously, the oldest person was William IV, who became king in 1830, aged 64. Well, Charles is 73. And he will know that this is a challenge for anybody to step into the position so successfully occupied for so many years by Elizabeth II. And he has had a long time to think about this. He's never spoken about it publicly because that really would not be appropriate. The only clue he has given is that he fully understands that the role of monarch is different to that of Prince of Wales. So he has assured people that he will not meddle, which is the one great concern that people have had about him. It was the one area in which, one area among many, that the Queen, Elizabeth, was so successful. She understood the limits, what a monarch needed to do, how far a monarch could go. And Charles, one can be confident, also must understand that. So he will reign in his own way, but within the constraints of the constitutional monarchy. So he understands that, though he may, I think, attempt to be a little bit more proactive than the Queen has been throughout, or the Queen was throughout her reign. He, I think, will attempt to use the convening powers. But that, again, that is really all for the future. He will, I think, travel around the country. He will want to establish himself, want to lead the nation's mourning for his mother, now that the reign, the long reign of Elizabeth II has ended.
I just want to share again the statement made by the new king. This is the statement by King Charles III, and he says, the death of my beloved mother, Her Majesty the Queen, is a moment of the greatest sadness for me and all members of my family. And Charles goes on, we mourn profoundly the passing of a cherished sovereign and a much-loved mother. I know her loss will be deeply felt throughout the country and the realms and the Commonwealth, and by countless people around the world. And during this period of mourning and change, my family and I will be comforted and sustained by our knowledge of the respect and deep affection in which the Queen was so widely held. A statement by the former Prince of Wales, now King Charles III, because the Prime Minister has confirmed that the Queen, now having died at the age of 96, has been succeeded by Charles and will be known as King Charles III and the Queen Consort, of course, Camilla. Let's go to Downing Street then, where the Prime Minister Liz Truss has just delivered her tribute, and join Chris Mason, our political editor. The Prime Minister certainly wanted to pay tribute to the Queen's long record of service, Chris, but also wanted to, I suppose, introduce a little bit of a personal element, in the sense that she said that the Queen for her had been very much someone who'd inspired her over the years.
Yes, that's right, Hugh, and a Prime Minister just 48 hours in office, tasked with finding the words for such a profound moment in our country's history. Just picking out a few of the sentences that struck me in the statement from Liz Truss just a few moments ago. The rock on which modern Britain was built, she reflected about Her Majesty the Queen. Britain is a great country today,